The number I kept coming back to was $44,000. What you get when a burst appendix turns into a 3-day ICU stay and your insurance has a deductible that might as well be a joke, and the billing department sends you a statement that you read 3 times because the total keeps looking like someone's phone number. My wife Carol's appendix. 14 months ago. She was fine, recovered clean, back to work in 6 weeks. And we were $44,000 behind a starting line we hadn't even been at to begin with. We had savings. Had. 11,000 of it went in the first month, and after that we were just managing the bleed, moving things around, paying minimums, doing the math that people in that situation do, where you calculate how long you can hold a position before the position collapses. I was doing warehouse receiving in Peoria, decent hourly, steady, and then the facility announced closure in February and gave us 90 days notice, which sounds generous until you're the one with 90 days. I applied for everything within driving distance. Took 2 interviews that went nowhere. Then a guy in the parking lot of the unemployment office. Not a metaphor, an actual guy, Terry, who I'd worked with at the warehouse, told me Dunbar Regional Freight in Veller was hiring overnight drivers and paying night differential on top of base, plus a per-run bonus that worked out to about $4.20 more per hour than anything else I'd found. I looked up Veller when I got home. Population 1,400. 40 minutes southwest of Peoria on roads I'd never driven. Carol and I sat at the kitchen table, and I wrote the math out on a legal pad. Base rate, differential, bonus per run, estimated monthly minus expenses. 14 months to clear the debt if nothing else went wrong. Carol taped the legal pad to the refrigerator. I want to mention one thing about my driving history because it matters later, and I'd rather put it here than have it seem like I'm building something. I did long haul for 3 years in my late 20s, before the warehouse job, before Carol, before any of this. Midwest to Southeast corridor mostly, sometimes out to the Mid-Atlantic. Nothing glamorous. You drive long enough and alone enough, and you start developing habits that aren't really habits, so much as a background process your brain runs without asking you. One of mine was reading road surfaces. Asphalt tells you things if you've looked at enough of it. Texture, color, the way it sits at the shoulder edge, the drainage pattern, whether a repair was done over something solid or something that was going to shift. You can see a bank curve coming before the road shows you the curve. You can tell if a section has been repaved over a problem that wasn't actually fixed. After 3 years of it, I could read a stretch of highway the way other people read weather. Not predicting exactly, just knowing what the conditions were saying and adjusting accordingly. Carol thinks it's the most boring skill a human being can possess. On road trips, she'll be looking at the scenery, and I'll say something like the drainage on this section is wrong. They patched over a sink, and she'll put her sunglasses on and turn up the radio. I told her about it at the kitchen table that night. Looking at the legal pad on the refrigerator, some half-formed thought about how the night route would be fine, because I knew how to read a road in the dark. She smiled and said, 14 months, Ray. Just get through 14 months. I took the job the next morning. Called the number Terry had given me. Spoke to a woman named Bev Dunbar who asked 3 questions, confirmed my class, it was current, and told me to be at the yard in Veller on Thursday at 10:30 p.m. I was there at 10:15. The Dunbar yard sits at the north edge of Veller on a county road that dead ends into it, which means the only traffic that comes down that road is Dunbar traffic, which at 10:30 on a Thursday night meant me and nobody else. The building was a converted farm supply store, wide and low, corrugated steel siding painted a green that had gone gray at the edges from weather. A hand-painted sign above the loading dock said Dunbar Regional Freight in letters that had been touched up enough times that the newer paint sat slightly proud of the older layers, like the name had been insisting on itself for years. 3 trucks in the lot. All Freightliner Cascadias, white, the kind of fleet white that isn't quite clean and isn't quite dirty, just the permanent color of a vehicle that works for a living. The one closest to the dock had a yellow arrow of reflective tape on the driver door that the others didn't. I found out later that was mine. Bev had already assigned it before I arrived, which at the time seemed like efficiency. The lot was lit by 2 pole lights on opposite corners that left the middle of the lot in a shadow band about 15 feet wide. I parked my car in it without realizing and had to move it. Small thing. I mention it because it set a tone I didn't have a word for yet. The sense of a place that was functional and ordinary in every specific detail and slightly off in the space between the details. Inside, the building smelled like diesel and old paper and the specific dry warmth of a space that gets cold in winter and never fully loses the memory of it, even in summer. A counter ran along the left wall with a dispatch radio and a logbook and a coffee machine that looked like it had been running continuously since the 90s. Bev Dunbar was behind the counter when I came in. I'd formed a vague impression of her from the phone, efficient, no-nonsense, the kind of person who asks exactly the question she needs and none she doesn't. And she matched it. 61, compact, dark hair gone mostly silver and pulled back without ceremony. She had the hands of someone who had worked outdoors for a long time and had not stopped working outdoors. She looked up when I came in and nodded once. The way you nod at someone whose name you already know and whose arrival you already accounted for. She walked me through the paperwork first. Standard carrier stuff, liability forms, route acknowledgement, emergency contact. I wrote Carol's name and number on the emergency contact line, and Bev looked at it and didn't say anything. Then she walked me out to the truck, showed me the pre-run check sequence, which was more involved than I expected. Not just the standard walk-around, but specific points she wanted checked in a specific order. Left rear tandems before right. Hood latch confirmed twice. She opened the passenger door and showed me the glove box. Inside was a folder with the route manifest, the delivery confirmation forms, and a laminated card in a plastic sleeve. She held the laminated card for a moment before she passed it over, her thumb running along the edge of it, a habit that had worn the laminate slightly soft at the corner. "Read it before you pull out," she said. "Not when you're moving. Before." I took it. 10 rules, numbered, printed cleanly on white cardstock and laminated. I started to read, and she put her hand on the top of the glove box door. "When you're alone," she said. "Read it when you're alone." She walked me around the route on a paper map spread on the hood of the truck, her finger tracing Route 9 from Veller to Crest Falls in the amber wash of the lot lights. 74 miles. 2-lane the whole way. She named the mile markers she wanted me to know: 14, 31, 44, 52, 61, 68, without explaining why those specifically, just pointed to each one on the map and said the number like she was confirming I could hear her. I asked what was at mile 52. "A dip," she said. "Road drops about 6 feet below grade. Come up out of it in your back level. It's on the card." I asked if the road was in good shape through Harrow County. She folded the map. "It's maintained," she said. I asked how long the run took on average. 4 hours 50, give or take. Depends on the night. I wanted to ask what it depended on specifically, because 4 hours 50 was almost exactly the window between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., and that precision seemed like either very consistent conditions or a very managed schedule. But something about the way she'd folded the map told me the conversation was done. She walked me back inside, handed me the delivery manifest, and poured 2 cups of coffee from the ancient machine. We stood at the counter and drank them without talking much. At 10:58, she looked at the clock on the wall and then at me. "You've got a 12-minute window," she said. 11 to 11:10. "Don't leave before, don't leave after." I asked what happened if I missed the window. She picked up her cup. "It's on the card," she said. At 11, she was back behind the counter with the logbook open, and I was in the truck with the engine running and the laminated card in my hand, and 74 miles of Route 9 sitting dark and flat in front of me, and I still hadn't read the rules yet. I pulled out of the lot at 11:02 and read them at the first stop sign, 200 yards down the county road, with my headlights cutting a white cone into the dark ahead and the town of Veller already disappearing in my mirrors. The stop sign sat at the junction of the county road and Route 9. Left went back into Veller. Right went into Harrow County and didn't come back to anything for 68 miles. I sat at the sign with the engine idling and the card in my hand and read it twice under the cab light. 10 rules. I'll get to all of them, but I want to talk about Bev first because the rules make more sense, or made more sense to me at the time. The wrong kind of sense once you understand who handed them to me and how she did it. I'd worked for maybe a dozen employers in my adult life. Warehouse supervisors, dispatch managers, a regional coordinator at the long-haul company who communicated exclusively by voicemail and expected you to do the same. I'd been handed orientation packets and safety manuals and the kind of laminated quick reference cards that exist because someone in HR decided they were necessary and nobody ever reads them. Bev handing me that card was not like any of those things. It was like being handed something that belonged to you specifically, like she'd been keeping it until the right person showed up to receive it. She had one detail I haven't mentioned yet. Her right hand had no ring finger. Not an old injury with scarring, just absent, the skin closed over the gap, cleanly, the kind of closure that happens when something has been gone long enough that the body has fully accepted it. She didn't cover it or position her hand to hide it. It was just a fact about her hand, the way her silver hair was a fact about her hair. I noticed it when she passed me the card, and then I looked at the card because that was the polite thing to do, and I didn't look at her hand again. At the end of the walkthrough, when I asked about the departure window, and she said it's on the card, I pushed one more time. I asked her if the route had given her any trouble over the years. She looked at me for a moment. "These kept me on the road," she said. "Not these will keep you safe. Not follow these, and you'll be fine. These kept me on the road." The past tense of it sat in the cab with me at the stop sign while I read the card the first time, and I filed it under. "Serious woman, runs a tight operation, probably had an incident years ago that made her cautious." That was the box I put it in. It was the wrong box, but it was the one I had. I turned right on Route 9 at 11:03, and the last light from Veller dropped out of my mirrors within a minute. The temperature dropped 2 degrees the moment I cleared the town limits, the specific drop that happens when you leave a place and the buildings stop absorbing the cold for you. The road ahead was flat and straight and dark in a way that took a moment to adjust to even for someone who'd driven long haul in the rural Midwest for 3 years. No ambient glow from any direction. No farmhouse lights visible from the road. Just the twin cones of my headlights and the center line and the dark on both sides. That was fields I couldn't see and sky I couldn't distinguish from the fields. The cab radio was already on AM 1070 when I started the truck. I hadn't touched it. I assumed Bev had said it before I arrived. The station was running an overnight farm report at that hour. A man's voice reading soybean futures and county weather advisories in a tone that suggested he'd been reading them for 20 years and expected to read them for 20 more. Not unpleasant. The kind of voice that fills a cab without demanding anything from you. I drove and read the card in alternating glances, the way you check your mirrors, quick and regular. Mile marker 4 came up on my headlights and passed, and I was officially inside Harrow County, and the rules were starting to make the particular kind of no sense that rules make when you're reading them alone at night on a dark road for the first time. I want to be clear that my first reaction to all 10 of them was practical skepticism. Not fear, not unease. Skepticism, the same way you're skeptical of an instruction manual that tells you to perform a step that seems unnecessary until you realize the manual was written by someone who learned the hard way that the step was necessary. I gave each rule the benefit of that doubt, and then I rationalized it into something manageable and drove on. That was my first mistake. Not the last, but the first. Rule 1 said depart Veller no earlier than 11 p.m. and no later than 11:10 p.m. If I missed the window, don't drive Route 9 that night. Return the truck to the yard and call dispatch. I read that one and thought, weight restriction window. Illinois has seasonal load limits on rural roads. Posted hours where heavy freight is restricted to protect the road base. And a specific departure window that kept you inside a compliant travel time made complete sense for a carrier that ran the same route every night. I filed it there and moved on. Rule 2 said between mile marker 14 and mile marker 31, maintain a speed of exactly 47 miles per hour. Do not slow below it. Do not exceed it. Cruise control recommended. If something is in the road, do not brake. Drive through it. The first 4 sentences I rationalized as speed trap avoidance, a stretch of road where local enforcement liked to sit, and 4-7 was the sweet spot between legal and moving efficiently. The last sentence I read 3 times. If something is in the road, do not brake. Drive through it. I decided that meant animals. Rural Illinois at night, deer especially, and the logic being that braking for a deer at highway speed caused more accidents than holding speed and accepting the impact. Brutal logic, but not impossible logic. I'd heard versions of it from other long-haul drivers. I moved on. Rule 3 said if I saw headlights behind me on Route 9 between mile marker 4 and mile marker 68, do not check my mirrors again until I reach mile marker 68. Log the sighting and continue. I thought, Bev has had a tailgating problem. Someone running the same stretch at night, riding too close, and the instinct to keep checking your mirrors makes it worse because you slow down involuntarily when you're watching someone behind you. Don't watch them. Maintain speed. Log it for her records. Reasonable. Moving on. Rule 4 said the cab radio was to remain on AM 1070 for the full length of Route 9. I could turn the volume down. I could not turn it off or change the station. I looked at the radio. AM 1070 already set, the farm report still running. I thought, Bev is old-fashioned and likes her drivers to have company on a dark road and has strong opinions about which company. I didn't think about it again for 3 weeks, and then I thought about it a great deal. Rule 5 said between mile marker 31 and mile marker 44, if I saw a structure on the left side of the road that was not there on my previous run, do not look at it directly. Keep my eyes on the center line. Log the mileage where I first saw it. Do not slow down. I read that one twice and landed on. Bev has a thing about abandoned structures. Rural Illinois has plenty of them, old farmhouses and outbuildings that have been sitting derelict for decades. And maybe there was a liability incident once, a driver who pulled over to investigate something and got hurt, and Bev had written the rule to prevent it happening again. The specific instruction not to look at it directly, I chalked up to distracted driving policy. Eyes on the road. Keep moving. Fine. Rule 6 said if the truck lost electrical power completely between mile marker 44 and mile marker 61, put in neutral, do not touch the brake, and let it roll until power returned. Do not use the emergency brake. Do not exit the vehicle for any reason until the engine restarted on its own. I flagged that one in my head to ask the mechanic about because it read like some kind of fault specific to that stretch. Something in the wiring that triggered intermittent total power loss, the kind of thing that never showed up at the yard because it only happened on the road. The no exit instruction I read as safety common sense. You don't get out a stalled truck on a dark two-lane highway at 2 a.m. That's just right. Rule 7 described the Harrow County dip at mile marker 52. Road drops 6 feet below grade. Maintain current speed exactly. Do not look at the drainage culverts on either side until I cleared the dip and returned to grade. I thought, the culverts are a distraction hazard. The dip is sudden and the culverts are at eye level when you're in it, and a driver who looks sideways at the wrong moment could drift. Keep eyes forward, hold speed, come out clean. Simple. Rule 8 said if my odometer reading and the mile markers disagreed by more than 0.3 miles, pull to the shoulder immediately, 4-way flashers on, wait without moving until they agreed again. Do not drive on a disagreeing odometer. I read that one and genuinely could not construct a rational explanation that fully satisfied me. So I did what you do with rules you can't explain. I accepted it as the one eccentric item on an otherwise defensible list and told myself I'd figure out eventually. Rule 9 said arrive at Crest Falls no earlier than 3:50 a.m. and no later than 4:10 a.m. If running early, slow down. If running late past 4:10, stop the truck, turn off all lights, and call dispatch. Do not attempt to make up time. I thought, delivery window, receiving dock staffing, same logic as the departure window. Someone was on the other end who needed me inside a specific slot. Rule 10 said before exiting the cab at delivery, check all 3 mirrors and confirm the road behind me was empty. If it was not empty, do not exit. Call dispatch and wait. I thought, Bev has had a reversing incident. Someone got out without checking and got clipped. Standard stuff, just written more formally than most carriers bother with. I put the car back in the glove box sleeve and drove on. The farm report had given way to an overnight country music block on AM 1070, something old and steel string that sat in the cab like it belonged there. Mile marker 14 came up in my headlights. I set the cruise control to 47 and watched the center line and told myself the rules were the rules of a careful woman running a small operation on a dark road. Nothing more. I believed that for about 4 weeks. The first 4 weeks were the best financial month I'd had in over a year, and I want to say that plainly because it matters. The per-run bonus hit my account every Friday, and I watched the number on the legal pad on the refrigerator change for the first time since Carol's surgery, and that feeling, the specific feeling of a debt getting smaller instead of larger, was enough to make a dark road through rural Illinois at 2 a.m. feel like the most reasonable place in the world to be. The routine settled fast. I leave the apartment in Peoria at 9, drive the 40 minutes to Veller, do the pre-run check on the truck the way Bev had shown me, pour coffee from the machine in the yard building, and be at the stop sign at the Route 9 junction by 10:58. Bev was there most nights for the first 2 weeks, logging my departure time, checking that I had the manifest. After that, she started leaving before I arrived, the logbook open on the counter with my name already filled in for the night's run, departure time blank for me to write it myself. The road was what it was. Flat, straight, dark, long. After the first week, I stopped noticing the dark the way you stop noticing the hum of an appliance that runs constantly. It became the condition of the work rather than a feature of it. My headlights, the center line, the mile markers ticking past in sequence, the farm report giving way to country music, giving way to an overnight talk program on AM 1070 that I never fully listened to but never turned off because the rules said not to, and because the alternative was silence, and silence on Route 9 at 1 a.m. was a different kind of company than I wanted. The Harrow County dip at mile 52 I came to think of as the midpoint marker. When I came up out of it and the road flattened back to grade, I knew I was past halfway, and Crest Falls was closer than Veller, and the run was in its second half. I held my speed through it the way the rules said, and kept my eyes on the center line and didn't look at the culverts, and after the first 3 or 4 times, I stopped thinking about why the rules specify the culverts and just followed it the way you follow any procedural instruction that has a clear physical action attached to it. Carol asked me about the route after the first week. We were at the kitchen table, which was where we had most of our important conversations because the kitchen table was where the legal pad was, and the legal pad was what the conversations were really about. She asked if the road was lonely. I said not particularly. I said it was dark, but dark wasn't the same as lonely, that there was a difference between a space with nobody in it and a space that felt empty, and Route 9 didn't feel empty exactly. It just felt like it was its own thing, a road that existed on its own terms. She looked at me over her coffee cup. That's a strange thing to say about a road. I said long-haul drivers develop opinions about roads. She put her sunglasses on, which was a joke we had, and I laughed, and we talked about something else. I should have told her what I meant by its own terms. I had the words for it. I just didn't want to use them yet, because using them would mean I'd already decided something I wasn't ready to decide. What I meant was this. Route 9 through Harrow County behaved like a road. It had asphalt and centerline paint and mile markers and drainage culverts, and a dip at mile 52 that came and went the same way every time. But the road surface had something I kept noticing and kept not being able to name, a quality in the texture, in the way the asphalt caught my headlights, that was slightly different from other Illinois state roads I'd driven. Not worse, not damaged, just different. The way a recurring fault in a machine has a specific signature that you start to recognize before you know what it means. I've been reading road surfaces long enough to know when a road felt like itself, and when it felt like a record of something that had happened to it, and Route 9 felt like the second thing. I didn't write that on the legal pad. I kept it in the category of long-haul driver habits that Carol found boring and drove on. It was on a Wednesday, in my 3rd week, that I noticed the grain elevator. I was running the stretch between mile markers 31 and 44, cruise control of 47, the overnight talk program murmuring on AM 1070, and I saw it on the left side of the road. A grain elevator, the standard central Illinois type, cylindrical concrete bins, maybe 6 of them, a leg structure, and a head house on top, a scale shed at the base. Dark. No leads. No vehicles. No activity. It sat maybe 200 feet back from the road on what looked like a gravel access track. I looked at it as I passed. Full look, not a glance, because it was between 31 and 44, and Rule 5 said, don't look directly at a structure that wasn't there on your previous run, but I decided this one had been there all along, and I'd simply missed it. 3 weeks of the same dark road at the same time of night, and you still miss things. That was normal, except I checked my log when I got to Crest Falls. Every run, every night, same stretch. No entry. Not once had I written down a grain elevator between 31 and 44, and I was the kind of driver who noted landmarks by habit, because landmarks were how you track your position when your instruments disagreed with each other. I sat in the cab at the Crest Falls dock and looked at the log for a while. Then I decided I'd been missing it for 3 weeks because it was dark and set back from the road, and I was watching the center line the way I was supposed to be. That was the explanation, and it was good enough, and I wrote nothing in the log and went inside to get the delivery signed. On my next run, I watched for it between 31 and 44 with the specific attention of someone who knows where to look. Nothing at the tree line. Nothing on the gravel access track. There was nothing there. Week 5, a Tuesday, mile marker 22, 1:14 a.m. Headlights appeared in my mirrors. I saw them the way you see something in your peripheral vision before your eyes fully commit to it. A brightness in the lower left corner of the driver's side mirror, there and registered before I decided to look. Single vehicle, white headlights, standard height, the right distance back for a vehicle traveling at roughly my speed. Nothing unusual about the image itself. Everything unusual about the fact that there was nothing behind me when I'd passed mile marker 4, nothing at mile marker 9, nothing at mile marker 14 when I'd set the cruise control, nothing for 18 miles of empty road, and then headlights at mile marker 22 with no intersection, no farm track, no gravel pull-off between where I'd been and where I was that could account for a vehicle appearing from nowhere. Rule 3 said, don't check my mirrors again until mile marker 68. I had already checked. One look, maybe 2 seconds, enough to see the headlights and register their distance and speed. The rule said if you see headlights, don't check again. It didn't say don't see them in the first place. I told myself that distinction mattered and kept my eyes on the road ahead. What I did instead of checking the mirrors was listen. An old long-haul habit. When you can't look, you listen for engine sound, for the change in road noise that tells you another vehicle is closing distance or dropping back. At 47 miles per hour on a flat straight road with my own engine running, I couldn't hear anything behind me. That was normal. That told me nothing. I watched the center line. I watched the mile markers. 23, 24, 25. The cruise control held 47, and I held the wheel, and I did not look at the mirrors. Mile marker 68 took 46 minutes to reach from mile marker 22 at 47 miles per hour, which is a calculation I did not make consciously, but which my body apparently tracked because by the time the marker came up on my headlights, my hands were tight enough on the wheel that I had to consciously open them before I reached for the mirror adjustment. I checked the driver's side mirror first, then the passenger side, then the center. The road behind me was empty. Flat, straight, dark, the center line running back toward where I'd come from until it disappeared into the limit of my taillights. Nothing. No headlights. No vehicle, no red glow of taillights pulling away, just the road and the dark on either side of it. I checked the odometer. The mile markers and the odometer agreed. I wrote in the log, 1:14 a.m., headlights observed, mirror, mile marker 22, no vehicle present at mile marker 68. Then I put the pen down and watched the road and tried to build an explanation that worked. A vehicle that had turned onto a farm track between mile markers 22 and 68. Possible. I hadn't seen a farm track, but I wasn't watching for them. I was watching the center line. Rural Illinois had access roads every half mile sometimes, unpaved, unlit, easy to miss at night. A vehicle that matched my speed for 46 miles and then turned off without my noticing was unlikely, but not impossible. I held that explanation until Crest Falls. It fit well enough to drive on, but not well enough to put down, the way a temporary repair holds weight, but changes the feel of the thing it's holding. I logged the delivery, got the confirmation signed, drove the empty return to Veller in the early morning gray, and parked the truck and went home and didn't tell Carol because there was nothing to tell that I could say in words that would sound like anything other than a tired man seeing things on a dark road. But I thought about Rule 3 differently after that. The specific instruction not to check your mirrors wasn't about tailgating. It wasn't about a driver who slowed down when he watched someone behind him. It was written by someone who knew what was back there and had decided that not seeing it was better than seeing it, and had made that decision into a rule so that every driver who came after wouldn't have to make it themselves. I almost believed my own rationalization. Almost. Week 6, A Thursday, mile marker 52, 2:31 a.m. I'd been through the Harrow County dip maybe 30 times by that point. The approach was the same every night. The road ran flat and straight, and then the grade dropped away faster than you expected, even when you were expecting it, 6 feet below the surrounding land in the space of about 40 yards. And at the bottom, the culverts came up on both sides. Concrete drainage channels maybe 4 feet wide and 3 feet deep running perpendicular to the road before they bent away under the fields. Then the grade came back up and you were level again, and the dip was behind you and mile marker 53 was ahead. 30 times. I knew the feel of it the way I knew the feel of my own driveway. The drop, the culverts in my peripheral vision, the climb back out. I held my speed exactly and kept my eyes on the center line and came through it the same way every time, and it was the closest thing the route had to a landmark I felt comfortable with. That Thursday something was in the right culvert. I saw it in the last second before the dip. The way you see something at the edge of your headlight range that your brain processes a half second after your eyes have already moved past it. A shape, not an animal shape. Not the low, compact silhouette of a raccoon or the leggy outline of a deer. Something at the bottom of the culvert that had volume and stillness in the specific combination that living things have when they're being deliberately still rather than simply at rest. My foot moved to the brake. I caught it before it made contact. My foot was off the accelerator and dropping toward the brake pedal, and I pulled it back and put it on the accelerator and held 47 and kept my eyes on the center line and went into the dip. The culverts came up on both sides. I did not look at them. I looked at the center line, the painted yellow stripe running ahead of me through the bottom of the dip, and I held it the way you hold a fixed point when everything around it is trying to pull your attention away. My peripheral vision registered the culvert edges, the concrete lips, and below them the dark of the channels themselves, and in the right channel something that my peripheral vision said was there and my eyes refused to confirm. I heard the culvert water in the right channel. There should not have been water in July. For seconds through the bottom, maybe 5. Then the grade came back up and I was climbing out of the dip and the culverts dropped below road level and disappeared, and I was back on flat Route 9 with mile marker 53 coming up in my headlights and my hands on the wheel doing something they hadn't done in 6 weeks of night driving, which was shake. I didn't log it immediately. I drove another 2 miles with my hands tied on the wheel and the shaking working its way out through my fingers and into the steering, a fine vibration that the truck absorbed without registering. And I breathed the way my grandfather had taught me to breathe when something scared you, which was slow and through the nose and without making a sound, because making a sound meant whatever scared you knew it had worked. At mile marker 55, I picked up the log and wrote, 2:31 a.m., mile marker 52, shape observed in right drainage culvert, held speed, did not brake, did not look directly. And I put the log down and drove. What I want to say about the rational explanation is that I tried to build one, and I got about halfway through the construction before I ran out of materials. An animal was possible. A large animal, a coyote or a dog, something that crouched low when it heard the truck coming and held still in the culvert bottom until I passed. The shape my peripheral vision had given me didn't fit a coyote or a dog, but peripheral vision at night through a moving windshield is not a reliable instrument, and I knew that, and I used it. What I couldn't use was the road surface. Past mile marker 53, the asphalt changed. Not dramatically, not a different color or a visible seam, but the texture shifted in a way I felt through the steering wheel before I saw it in my headlights. A section of maybe 60 yards where the road surface had the specific quality of pavement that has been disturbed and relayed, the kind of texture that happens when something underneath has moved and the repair has been done over the movement rather than under it. I'd seen on highway sections above old water main breaks, above soft shoulders that had shifted, above things that had been buried and had settled unevenly in the burial. The section ended at mile marker 54, and the road went back to its normal texture, and I drove on. I didn't write that in the log. I wasn't sure how to write it in a way that wouldn't sound like a man who'd been driving alone in the dark too long and was finding patterns in asphalt. But I thought about it the rest of the way to Crest Falls, and I thought about Rule 7 and the specific instruction not to look at the culverts, and I understood for the first time that the rule wasn't about distracted driving. It was about not seeing something that, once seen, would make it very hard to keep driving the route. Bev had known that. She'd written it down, so I wouldn't have to find out the hard way. The rational explanation didn't survive the drive back to Veller. I let it go somewhere around mile marker 30 and didn't replace it with anything. Just drove. Just held 47 through the stretch and watched the center line and kept the radio on AM 1070 and let the overnight talk program fill the cab with voices that asked nothing of me and drove on through the dark until Veller came up on the horizon and I pulled into the yard and sat in the truck for a few minutes before I went inside. I wrote in the log, "Quiet night, routine completed." It was the first time I'd written that specific phrase. I hadn't known until that moment that it was a phrase with a history. I found a second card on Friday, 7 weeks in, during a pre-run check that ran long because the left rear tandems had a slow leak I wanted to confirm before I pulled out. I was in the cab filling out the pre-run checklist when I opened the glove box for the manifest folder, and the folder was slightly thicker than usual, the way a folder gets when something has been slipped behind the contents rather than into them. I pulled everything out and found it behind the delivery confirmation forms. Same size as the rule card, same laminate sleeve, but the sleeve was yellowed at the corners in the specific way that plastic yellows when it's been in a warm enclosed space for a long time. 15 years minimum. I pulled the card out of the sleeve. 7 rules, not 10. Printed in the same clean font as Bev's card, on the same white cardstock. I read through them. 3 of the rules were identical to rules on Bev's card, word for word. The departure window, the 47 miles per hour stretch, the mirror rule. 4 different. The different ones were what helped me. Rule 4 on the old card said, if the road surface changes color between mile marker 44 and mile marker 61, do not stop for any reason. Maintain speed. Do not look at the shoulder. You will know it has returned to normal when AM 1070 resumes without static. Rule 5 said, if you hear a voice on AM 1070 that addresses you by name, turn the volume to 0 immediately and do not respond. Do not say anything aloud. Drive to mile marker 68 before turning the volume back up. I read those 2-3 times each. Then I read the remaining 2 different rules. 1 covered the dip at mile 52, nearly identical to Bev's version, but with one addition at the end. If you hear sound from the culverts as you pass, it is already too late to look away. Keep your eyes forward. It has seen you. It will not follow past mile 68 if you do not stop. The last different rule was about the arrival window, same as Bev's, but with a final sentence that Bev's version didn't have. The window exists because it does not cross into day. I sat with the card in my hands for a long time. The yard lights came on outside, the motion sensor ones at the lot corners, triggered by something moving in the dark outside the truck. I looked up. Nothing visible. The light stayed on for 30 seconds and then went off. I turned the old card over. On the back, in handwriting rather than print, 2 lines. The handwriting was small and controlled, the kind that belongs to someone who writes carefully because they've learned that careless writing gets misread and misreading has consequences. It said, these are the ones that cost us before we understood. The ones on the front are what's left after we learned what mattered. No name, no date, no indication of who was referred to. I put the old card next to Bev's card on the passenger seat and looked at them side by side for a moment. Same font, same cardstock, allowing for age. Same layout, same numbering style, same way of stating each rule as a direct instruction with the condition first and the behavior second. Same handwriting on the back of the old card as on the delivery confirmation forms Bev filled out each week for the manifest folder. I looked at that for a long time. The handwriting on the back of the old card and Bev's handwriting on the confirmation forms were not similar. They were identical. The specific way the letters connected, the slight leftward lean on the capitals, the way the number 4 was written open at the top rather than closed. Identical. And the laminate on the old card was 15 years worn at minimum, which meant Bev had written on the back of that card at least 15 years ago, which meant she had been running this route and refining these rules for at least that long, which meant the version she'd handed me was not the first version, and the drivers before me had operated on earlier versions that had cost them in ways Bev had then corrected for. I thought about her right hand. The missing finger, the skin closed over the gap like the body had decided to stop waiting for it to come back. I thought about the line on the old card. These are the ones that cost us before we understood. I started the truck. I checked the clock. I pulled out at 11:04 and turned right on a Route 9 and drove into Harrow County with AM 1070 on the radio and both cards in the glove box and 74 miles of dark road ahead of me. I drove through mile marker 14 and set the cruise control to 47 and watched the center line and thought about what it meant that something on this road had been in an arrangement with the people who drove it for long enough that the arrangement had its own document, its own version history, its own record of what had been learned and at what cost. And I thought about Rule 8, the odometer rule, the one I'd never been able to rationalize fully, the one I'd filed as the single eccentric item on an otherwise defensible list and told myself I'd figure out eventually. I hadn't figured it out. I'd just been lucky enough not to need to yet. Week 8, a Wednesday, 1:47 a.m. I was between mile markers 38 and 39, inside the no-look stretch, cruise control at 47, the overnight top program on AM 1070 running a segment about county water table levels that I was not listening to but was glad to have in the cab. The run had been clean. No headlights behind me. The grain elevator between 31 and 44 had not appeared. I'd come through the dip at 52, 20 minutes earlier with my eyes on the center line and nothing in the culverts that my peripheral vision flagged, and I was in the second half of the route with Crest Falls closer than Veller and the run winding toward its close. I was watching the road surface, not with any specific intention, just the background habit running the way it always ran, my eyes doing their automatic read of the asphalt ahead, while the conscious part of my brain was elsewhere. The texture between 38 and 39 was the same as it always was, that slightly different quality I'd noticed in week 1 and never fully named, the road that felt like a record of something rather than just a surface. I was used to it. It had stopped registering as wrong and started registering as Route 9. The specific character of this specific road, the same way a familiar voice has a character you stop noticing because you know it too well. Then the texture changed. Not dramatically. A shift in the way the headlights caught the surface. A change in the reflective quality of the asphalt that my eyes logged before my brain did. The same way they'd logged the headlights in the mirror at mile 22. I registered it as information first and as alarm second, which gave me maybe 2 seconds of pure observation before the alarm arrived. The road ahead looked right. Center line, shoulder markings, the flat straight run of Route 9 exactly as it should be. But the surface was wrong in a way I had no word for except. Not the same road. I looked at the odometer. The odometer read 41.7 miles from Veller. Mile marker 39 had just passed. The disagreement was 2.7 miles, not 0.3, not the threshold. 2.7 miles, which meant I had crossed the 0.3 threshold somewhere back and had not caught it, had been driving on a disagreeing odometer without knowing it, and Rule 8 said pull over immediately when the disagreement exceeds 0.3, and I was 2.4 miles past immediately. I pulled to the shoulder. 4-way flashers on. Truck and park. The flashers threw orange light in a pulse across the road surface ahead of me, and in that pulsing light the wrongness of the surface was more visible, not less. The asphalt catching the light at a slightly different angle than it should have, the shoulder edge sitting differently against the ground beside it, the center line paint a shade that was almost the right white, but wasn't. I sat with my hands on the wheel and waited the way the rule said to wait. The odometer would agree with the mile markers again. That was what the rule implied, that the disagreement was a temporary condition and stillness was the correction. I watched the odometer. 41.7. I looked ahead for a mile marker. The next one should have been 40, but I couldn't see it in the flasher light and the dark beyond. The AM 1070 signal went to static. Not gradually. Clean cut, mid-sentence. The water table segment replacing itself with white noise that filled the cab the way the talk program had filled it, but differently, the way a room changes when a door opens somewhere else in the building. The pressure difference arriving before any other sign that something has moved. I looked at the radio. The display still showed AM 1070. The signal was gone. The old card's Rule 4. If the road surface changes color between mile marker 44 and mile marker 61, do not stop for any reason. I had stopped. I was at mile marker 39 by the markers, 41.7 by the odometer, and I had stopped and the radio had gone static, and the road surface was wrong. And I was sitting in an orange flashing truck on a shoulder that felt like a shoulder, but sat wrong against the ground. Then the cab pressure changed. Not temperature, pressure. The specific sensation of a space becoming less itself. The way a room changes when a door opens somewhere else in the building and the pressure difference arrives before any other sign that something has moved. I looked at the road ahead. The surface was continuing to change. Not color. The old card said color, and this wasn't color. This was texture and reflectivity and the specific way the road sat in the landscape around it, settling differently, as if the ground it rested on was breathing at a rate inconsistent with ground. My headlights were showing me something that looked like Route 9, the way a very good copy looks like the original. Correct in every deliberate detail and wrong in the space between the details, in the things the copy didn't know to replicate, because they weren't visible to whoever was doing the copying. I read it the way I'd read roads for 3 years in my 20s. The shoulder edge on the right side of the truck was the tell. Original road surfaces meet the ground at a specific angle, a specific compression, a specific way the asphalt edge sits against the soil beside it. The shoulder edge ahead of me was wrong. Not damaged, not eroded. Wrong in a more fundamental way. As if the road and the ground it was touching were two different things that had been placed next to each other rather than one thing that had been built from the other. Except at the immediate right edge of the shoulder, right where my passenger side tires were sitting. There at the extreme right margin of the pavement, the edge angle was correct. The compression was correct. The way the asphalt met the soil was the way I'd seen it meet soil on 10,000 miles of rural highway. The original road surface was still there. Right there at the shoulder edge, maybe 18 inches of it running alongside whatever this was that had replaced the rest. I looked at the odometer. Still 41.7. I looked ahead. The 18 inches of original surface ran as far as my headlights reached. I thought about Rule 2. Between mile marker 14 and mile marker 31, maintain a speed of exactly 47 miles per hour. The only speed the rules ever specified. The only number Bev had given me for how fast to move through Harrow County. I put the truck in drive. I pulled off the shoulder slowly, feeling for the original surface with the passenger side, tires the way you feel for a curb in the dark, by the change in resistance, by the way the steering wheel reports the edge of things before your eyes confirm them. The passenger tires found it. I felt it in the wheel, the specific solidity of pavement that was what it was supposed to be, and I steered toward it, keeping the passenger side on the original surface and letting the driver's side run on whatever the rest of the road had become. I brought the speed up to 47. Not faster, not slower. My left hand was doing more work than my right. The wheel wanted to drift left into whatever the road had become, and I held it right, toward the shoulder, the way you'd steer a boat toward a bank when the current wants you to go the other way. The cruise control wouldn't hold it on the uneven surface split, so I held it manually, watching the speedometer, keeping the needle at 47 the way. I'd kept it for 8 weeks through the marked stretch. Because 47 was the number the rules gave, and the rules had been written by someone who understood this road from the other side of whatever the road was, and 47 was what they had specified, and I had no better information than that. The cab pressure held. The static on AM 1070 held. The road surface around me held its wrongness, and I held the passenger tires on the 18 inches of original asphalt and drove. I watched the shoulder edge. The original surface ran consistent and solid under the passenger tires, and I followed it the way my grandfather had taught me to follow a fence line in the dark, by feel and by the sound of it, by the specific feedback of something real under you when everything around it isn't. A mile marker came up on the left side of the road. I couldn't read it at the angle I was driving, passenger tires on a shoulder, but it was there, and it was a marker, and markers meant the road was asserting its own geography. Then the static broke. AM 1070 came back mid-sentence. The water table segment resuming as if it hadn't stopped. The host's voice filling the cab with the specific ordinary warmth of a voice that doesn't know anything is wrong, because nothing is wrong where it's coming from. I looked at the odometer. 43.1 miles. I looked for the next mile marker. It came up on the left. 43. Disagreement 0.1 miles. Inside the threshold. The road surface normalized under all 4 tires simultaneously, the wrongness clearing the way a sound drops when the source stops, completely, and with no transition. The shoulder edge on the right was correct. The asphalt sat against the ground the way asphalt should sit. The headlights showed me Route 9, the actual Route 9, flat and straight and dark and ordinary. I held 47 and drove, and did not stop again until Crest Falls. I reached mile marker 68 at 2:49 a.m. and checked my mirrors. All 3, driver's side, passenger side, center. The road behind me was empty. Flat, straight, dark, the center line running back toward Harrow County until it disappeared into the limit of my taillights. Nothing behind me, nothing at the shoulder edges, nothing in the dark on either side of the road. I logged it the way Rule 3 implied I should, not because the rule specified logging the all clear, but because I needed to write something down, and that was the closest I had to the right thing. I drove the remaining 6 miles to Crest Falls at the speed limit with both hands on the wheel and the AM 1070 water table segment finishing up and giving way to a farm equipment ad that I heard every word of without processing any of it. The Crest Falls Depot appeared on the right at 3:54 a.m. Inside the window, the dock lights on and the receiving door up the way it always was. I backed in by feel and shut the engine down and sat in the cab for a moment before I did anything else. My hands were steady. That surprised me. They've been steady since mile marker 43, since the road came back and the radio came back and the 18 inches of original asphalt became the whole road again, steady in the specific way that hands go steady after they've been through something that required everything they had and have come out the other side of it. Not calm, steady. The difference being that calm is an absence and steady is a condition you maintain through effort, even when you'd rather not. I checked Rule 10. Before exiting the cab, check all 3 mirrors. Confirm the road behind you is empty. If it is not empty, do not exit. I checked. Empty. I got out. The receiving clerk at Crest Falls was a man named Otto, who worked every night I delivered and who had never asked me anything beyond whether I needed a signature on 1 line or 2. I handed him the manifest. He signed it. I stood at the dock counter and looked at the wall behind him, which had a clock and a whiteboard with truck arrival times written in marker, and I waited until the clock showed 4:02 before I picked up my copy of the manifest and folded it into my jacket pocket. Then I went back out to the cab and called Carol. It was 4:03 a.m. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice doing the specific thing it did when she'd been asleep and was trying not to sound like it, slightly higher than normal, the consonants a little soft. I said, "I'm quitting the Dunbar job." Silence. Then, Ray. "I know," I said. "The plan." "I know. 14 months. I said I knew. I said the money wasn't right, which was the wrong word for the right reason, and I knew it was the wrong word, but I didn't have the right one, and Carol was half asleep at 4 a.m., and the right word was not something I could say into a phone in a depot parking lot in Crest Falls, Illinois, to a woman who had a legal pad on the refrigerator with a number on it that was finally going in the right direction. She didn't argue. She knew my voice well enough to know when I was telling her something I'd already decided, and when I was telling her something I was still deciding, and this was the first kind. She said okay. She said come home. She said we'd figure out the number. I sat in the cab until 4:06, and then I drove the empty return to Veller in the early morning dark with AM 1070 on the radio, and the rule card in the glove box, and the old car behind it, and Route 9 running straight and flat and ordinary under my tires all the way back, every mile marker in its right place, the odometer and the markers agreeing at every point. The road surface reading clean and solid and exactly like itself the entire way. I held 47 through the marked stretch out of habit. I didn't look at the culverts at mile 52 out of something else. I pulled in the Dunbar yard at 6:11 a.m. and Bev was there. She was at the counter with a logbook open, which meant she'd come in early or hadn't left, and when I came through the door, she looked at me the way she'd looked at me on my first night, the assessing look of someone confirming a thing they already knew but needed to see confirmed in person. I put the manifest on the counter. I put my key on top of it. Then I reached into my jacket and put the rule card on the counter beside the key, the laminate sleeve and all, and I watched her look at it. She looked at it for a moment, then at me. "You made it to 68, she said. I didn't answer. I picked up my final pay envelope from the counter where she'd already set it, and I walked out. I took a daytime job in Peoria 3 weeks later. Local delivery, urban routes, done by 4 in the afternoon, home for dinner. The pay was less. The math on the legal pad changed. Carol and I sat at the kitchen table and worked out a new number, a longer number, 22 months instead of 14, and she wrote on the legal pad, and the legal pad stayed on the refrigerator, because taking it down would mean something neither of us wanted it to mean. I still read road surfaces. I can't not. It's in the hands now, in the way the steering wheel reports the ground under it. Automatic and constant, the background process that runs whether I ask it to or not. Every road I drive, I'm reading texture, edge, angle, the way the asphalt sits against what's underneath it. The way it tells you things about what it's been through and what it's resting on, and whether what it's resting on is what it should be. I haven't found it anywhere else. Every road I've driven since Harrow County has read clean, has sat right against its ground, has been exactly what it presented itself as being. I don't know if that means it's only Route 9, or if it means I haven't driven far enough in the right direction yet. I try not to think about which of those is more likely. The legal pad is still on the refrigerator. Carol hasn't taken it down, and neither have I. 22 months. The number gets smaller every week, the same as it always did, just slower now, the way a long road gets shorter, mile by mile, one marker at a time. Daylight only, urban routes, home by 4. It's a choice I made, and I know exactly what it cost, and I'd make it again. But sometimes on the drive to work in the morning, on a stretch of road I've driven 100 times, my hands will register something in the steering wheel, a change in the way the surface reports itself, a shift in the texture that the asphalt shouldn't have. And for a half second before my brain catches up, my body already knows what it might mean, and my foot comes off the gas and my eyes go to the center line, and I hold my speed and I don't look at the shoulder. And then the road goes back to normal, and I keep driving, and I don't write it in any log, and I don't tell Carol, and I turn the radio up and I go to work.